There are days when the ground seems to disappear beneath your feet, not because of a real earthquake, but because of a silent collapse that begins within, when certainties dissolve, connections weaken, and the soul, even in silence, cries out for direction. Maybe you're feeling exactly that right now, an invisible emptiness, an anxiety you can't quite name, awaiting for something even you can't explain. And in the middle of this unseen confusion, a question rises like an ancient whisper. What part of you have you forgotten to access when everything around you is falling apart? There is a kind of strength that only reveals itself when all others fail. A peace that doesn't depend on circumstances, a type of presence that doesn't come from the external world, but from a center within you, forgotten yet never lost. Crisis, as paradoxical as it may seem, is that portal. Not a punishment, not a curse, but a vibrational opportunity, a calling, an invitation to see the invisible. It is in this silent laboratory that faith stops being a concept and becomes a choice, where self-knowledge stops being a luxury and becomes survival. In this unstable energetic field, the oldest programs of the mind rise to the surface, and it's at that exact moment that you can decide whether to continue being led by them or to begin rewriting your frequency with new internal commands. Napoleon Hill, with the clarity of someone who understood the invisible laws of life, said that within every adversity lies the seed of an equal or greater benefit. It's a powerful phrase, but it is not magic. It requires awareness. It asks you to look for the seed even when the soil feels barren, and Psalm 46 is exactly that, a vibrational map that teaches us to find fertile ground in the midst of the desert. Be still and know that I am God. This is not an order to escape. It's a reminder to return, a realignment of presence, where you move out of mental noise and into coherence with a greater, deeper, more real intelligence. Greg Braden, Bridging Spirituality and Science, has shown that deep states of trust generate heart coherence, and that this coherence sends out electromagnetic waves that influence not only your body, but also the environment around you. In other words, when you align internally, something begins to organize externally. Even if it takes time, even if you can't see it yet, there is something silent and powerful happening every time you choose to quiet the mind and trust what vibrates in your heart. So maybe today, what you need is not an immediate solution, but a new inner stance. Perhaps the real miracle is not escaping the chaos, but discovering who you are within it. Because it's there in that hidden center the world cannot see that lives the strength capable of changing everything. Not like lightning from above, but like a light that was always on, just waiting for you to remember. It's not always what happens outside that breaks us. Sometimes what hurts the most is what starts to stir inside, a whisper that becomes a storm, a thought that turns into despair. When life tightens, fear doesn't knock. It enters, settles in, and begins to narrate distorted versions of reality. And when the mind is programmed by fear, it doesn't interpret facts. It amplifies danger. What was uncertain becomes a threat. What was a challenge turns into catastrophe. And without realizing it, external chaos blends with internal chaos, creating an emotional climate where everything seems to fall apart at once. This mental noise, though invisible, is one of the greatest thieves of spiritual strength. It operates silently, creating urgency where there is wisdom, creating pressure where there should be presence. The conditioned mind, accustomed to controlling everything, panics when control slips away. And that's when impulsive decisions, repetitive thoughts, and the feeling of imminent collapse arise. But underneath it all, something deeper is happening. Crisis disorganizes the ego's structure. It removes what was only surface identity, the roles you played, the scenes that maintained the illusion of stability, the certainties that shaped the person you thought you were. This disorganization may feel like a fall, but it can also be a passage. When the ego loses its references, the spirit can finally emerge, When fear screams, it becomes possible to hear what was always there, but never had space to be expressed. That's when a new vibration can be born. One that doesn't come from control but from surrender. Not from urgency but from attunement. Not from mental logic but from inner wisdom that reveals itself in silence. The urgency frequency, so present in crises, blocks real guidance because the sacred doesn't shout, the divine whispers. It doesn't compete with internal noise. It waits for you to choose to listen. And as long as you try to fix everything with the same tools that built the problem, you'll stay trapped in repetition. But when you acknowledge that there is something beyond your mental pattern, when you allow yourself to quiet the urgency, a new direction begins to emerge, not as an immediate answer, but as a different vibration, calmer, clearer, more aligned with who you truly are. Crisis then ceases to be a threat and becomes a transition, not into a new external scenario, but into a new state of consciousness. And that state is not born from logic. It's born from the vibrational decision to trust, even when everything feels uncertain, because sometimes true power doesn't come from solving the problem, but from not letting the problem displace you from your center. There is a profound difference between feeling safe and being safe. So often we look for security in things that move. Relationships, bank accounts, future plans, external approval. But anything that moves, anything that can be lost, can also make us vulnerable. And when life removes what once felt stable, we discover that the security we cultivated was fragile. It was emotional, but not spiritual. Structural, but not vibrational. Psalm 46 is not just an ancient prayer, it is an energetic alignment. When it says God is our refuge and strength, it's not offering a metaphor, it's offering a state of consciousness, an internal place that does not collapse, an invisible rock that stays firm when everything else crumbles. That fortress is not built on the outside, it is awakened from within. And as long as you believe you need to control the world to feel safe, you will keep living in a state of alert, trying to protect yourself from things that can only be dissolved with presence. Spiritual security is not the absence of chaos, it is the presence of coherence. It is when, even in the middle of the storm, something in you remains centered, calm, aware. Not because the circumstances are favorable, but because you are rooted in something deeper. It is peace that doesn't depend on the situation, faith that doesn't need proof, stillness that remains, even when the outer noise tries to pull you away. And perhaps that's why so many people feel lost in moments of crisis, because they sought external relief before cultivating internal strength. And so they created a cycle of emotional dependency, where well-being only happens if everything is under control. But true well-being is vibrational. It is born when you remember that your essence is unshakable, that your soul cannot be broken, that what is truly yours is not in things but in the awareness you carry. There is a quiet firmness that settles in when you stop chasing safety and start emanating safety. When you no longer seek shelter, you become the shelter. When your presence alone reorganizes the field around you, not through force, not through resistance, but through frequency. Psalm 46, in this sense, is not a request for protection. It is an awakening of spiritual sovereignty, a reminder that within you lies a point of stability untouched by the instability of the world. And it is precisely at that point that chaos loses its power, because you are no longer trying to fight it. You are vibrating beyond it. You are no longer battling pain. You are becoming greater than it. And this does not happen through effort. It happens through alignment, through a quiet decision to trust, to rest in that sacred space where true security lives, where God is not a distant idea, but a living frequency pulsing within your heart. Not all spirituality is liberating. Some, disguised as light, only feed denial. A peace that depends on avoiding the problem is not peace, it is avoidance. Optimism that refuses to face pain is not healing, it's anesthesia. And when we use spiritual language to avoid real contact with what we feel, we're not ascending, We're hiding. We're building a parallel world where everything must appear fine, even when inside everything is in ruins. And it's in that gap between appearance and truth that spiritual anxiety silently grows, the kind many feel but few dare to name. Crisis reveals the kind of spirituality you've been practicing, the performative or the embodied, the one you post or the one you live, the one you repeat like a mantra or the one you breathe when the ground disappears. There is a vast difference between repeating words and vibrating in alignment with them. True spirituality does not eliminate pain. It gives you structure to walk through it with clarity. It's not meant to escape life, but to enter it more consciously, with more presence, with more compassion. Confusing spiritual acceptance with vibrational passivity is a dangerous mistake. Acceptance is not giving up. Acceptance is stopping the fight against what is, so you can begin to act from a different place. It's looking with courage at what hurts and still choosing to vibrate coherence. Spiritual acceptance does not deactivate your creative power. On the contrary, it activates it. Because you stop using your energy to deny what is happening and start using it to transmute what's vibrating within you. There is another subtle trap: false positivity. The idea that just thinking positive is enough. But when positivity is used to cover up real feelings, it becomes toxic. It doesn't heal, it suffocates. Fear, sadness, doubt, they all need to be seen, acknowledged, and integrated, not as spiritual failures, but as legitimate parts of your evolution. Ignoring those emotions in the name of a high frequency only creates more guilt, more frustration, more disconnection. True spirituality is raw, sometimes silent, other times unsettling. It doesn't aim to look pretty, but to reveal what is true. And that's why in the hardest moments it may seem absent, not because it left her, but because in those moments the call is for you to come closer to yourself, without filters, without masks, without denial, just presence, just surrender, just the courage to feel what needs to be felt, until feeling becomes wisdom, until the darkness reveals its light, until chaos becomes direction. There are words that touch the soul as if whispered from within. Be still, not spoken as a demand to be silent, but as a remembrance, as someone gently reminding you of the wisdom that lives deep in your chest, beyond confusion, beyond fear, beyond urgency. To be still, in this sense, is not to silence your voice. It's to align your frequencies. It's to descend from the noise of the mind into the rhythm of the heart. It's to stop reacting and start listening. Listening to what life is saying. Listening to what your body is asking. Listening to what your soul already knows, but the noise kept you from hearing. In the language of neuroscience, this has a name: coherence. It's when the rhythms of the heart, the brain, and the energetic field become aligned. When your heartbeat grows more harmonious, your thoughts more organized, your nervous system shifts from survival into conscious presence. But before it's a scientific concept, it's an experience. And maybe you've already felt it. That moment when, even in the midst of chaos, something in you simply softens. Even if nothing outside has changed, something inside begins to shift. And that something changes everything. To be still with intention is not the same as just being quiet. It's a vibrational act. It's like telling your body, now we are safe, we can breathe. And the body, which reacts to the environment, begins to respond to that intention. Breathing deepens, the heartbeat slows, thoughts lose speed, and gradually an inner space opens. In that space, life fits again. Intuition finds its way. The answer begins to take shape, not through force, not through urgency, but like a seed breaking through the soil after the rain. This shift, from noise to center, can be cultivated through simple practices. One of them unfolds in 3 subtle steps. First, name what you're feeling. Without judgment, simply acknowledge it. Then, bring your attention to the center of your chest, not to escape the mind, but to return home. Finally, breathe as if the divine itself were holding you, not as a method of control, but as an act of surrender. And in that surrender, something reorganizes. To be still is therefore an active gesture. It is not apathy. It is not passivity. It is pure presence. It is choosing to vibrate from your center, even when everything around you tries to pull you to the edge. It is trusting that silence has its own language, that the pause is not the absence of action, but preparation for a more conscious, more aligned, more loving action. And perhaps that's why "be still" is not merely a comforting phrase. It's a calling, a neuro-spiritual command, an invisible turning point, because it is in that state that you reconnect with your true nature. And from there, everything that once seemed impossible slowly begins to transform, not because the world has changed, but because you've returned to who you've always been. There is a center within you that has never been touched by pain, a sacred, untouched point where no loss has reached, where no rejection has left a mark. And it's from this place that your creative power flows. Not the power that comes from effort, from urgency or pressure, but the one that rises from quiet alignment with your essence. When everything around you fragments, when mental noise intensifies, when your body carries the weight of fear, this center remains, waiting for you to remember. Science is beginning to understand what spiritual traditions have always known. The heart is more than a muscle. It is a command center. It emits an electromagnetic field stronger than the brain. And when it is coherent, it sends signals that reorganize not only the body but also the world around you. Not by magic, but by frequency, by vibration. And that coherence doesn't happen by accident. It comes from an act of trust. To trust not as a belief, but as a biological choice. A quiet assent. Even without understanding, I choose to remain. To trust in an inner God is not a religious act. It is a physiological gesture. It is choosing to align with something greater than fear. It is allowing that trust to reshape your heartbeat, your breathing, your thoughts. Because when the body feels at home, it stops fighting, it stops running, it stops trying to control everything. And in that space of non-resistance, the energy that was trapped in defense begins to flow toward creation. Lucid surrender, so often misunderstood in a society addicted to control, is one of the highest spiritual frequencies. Surrender is not giving up. It is recognizing that there is a wiser force conducting the process. It is placing the wounded ego in the hands of a higher intelligence and letting it remake from within what pain tried to destroy from the outside. When you surrender with awareness, you do not lose power. You activate the real power, the one that doesn't shout but transforms, the one that doesn't impose but illuminates, the one that, even in chaos, gently reorganizes life with silent love. This creative force does not need to be found. It needs to be released, and the portal to it is internal. It lives in your decision to trust, even when fear feels more real. It lives in your willingness to surrender to the flow of life, even without any guarantee of the outcome. It lives in your silent gesture of breathing deeply and telling yourself, "There is something in me that knows the way. I just need to let it lead." And then, without spectacle, without promises, something begins to move. Not because you forced it, but because you remembered, because you allowed, because you surrendered, not to chaos, but to your essence. When an earthquake shakes the ground, it's not only the buildings that tremble. What's on the surface shifts, cracks, and crumbles. But beneath the surface, in the deeper layers of the earth, there is stillness, there is steadiness, there is ground that remains untouched. That image, though physical, is also profoundly spiritual, because life in so many moments feels like an emotional earthquake, a wave of shocks that disrupts everything familiar, that breaks apart the structures you once depended on, that erases the certainties you used to lean on. But even in the midst of this apparent collapse, there is a place within you that has not been lost, a place that stays whole. That place is your center, not a geographical location, but a vibrational state. a place of presence that does not depend on what's happening around you, a sacred space that can be accessed even when pain feels unbearable, even when everything seems out of control. It is there that your deepest truth lives. It is there that you remember what truly matters. It is there that you find the peace the world cannot give, because that peace does not come from the outside. It comes from the coherence of being in touch with who you really are. The biblical metaphor of building your house on the rock, not on the sand, is more than a moral teaching. It is vibrational guidance. Sand shifts, gives way, does not support. Rock remains. When you build your life only on what is external, roles, titles, relationships, status, you are building on sand. But when you begin to build from your center, from your silence, from your inner truth, you are choosing the rock. And even if the winds come, even if the waters rise, even if the earth shakes, something in you stays standing. You can be the eye of the storm, not because there's no storm, but because you've chosen not to identify with it. The center doesn't eliminate the chaos. It transforms your relationship to it. You stop being a victim of circumstances and become a presence within them. You stop feeling swept away and begin to observe, to listen, to vibrate differently. And in that state, what once felt like despair becomes a passage. What once felt like an ending becomes a beginning. And perhaps the most extraordinary thing happens when, even in the midst of pain, you remember who you are. Not the wounded, fragmented, exhausted version of yourself, but your unbreakable essence, your quiet light, your power that doesn't shout but pulses, because there is a place in you that even the greatest crisis cannot touch. And when you return to that place, even if only for a moment, the transformation begins. Not because the world changed, but because you re-anchored in what is eternal within you. And that changes everything. There are moments when everything collapses, not just outside but within. And collapse, when it arrives, rarely gives warning. It just comes, taking what seemed certain, breaking what seemed solid, extinguishing the lights you once followed. And in that darkness where all seems lost, another possibility is born. The possibility of seeing what you didn't see before, of hearing what you once ignored, of accessing parts of yourself that until now had been asleep. This is how crisis transforms, from pain into direction, from fall into calling, from collapse into rebirth. Every crisis carries in silence an invitation, a vibrational calling, not a calling to return to what once was, but to move forward toward what is ready to emerge. And this calling does not come with words. It comes with restlessness, with emptiness, with discomforts that can no longer be ignored. It comes with the feeling that you no longer fit inside your former self, and at the same time, with the sense that something new wants to be born, even if you don't yet know what to call it. Crisis then ceases to be an ending and becomes a rite of passage, a transition between what was necessary until now and what now needs to be nurtured. It is the friction that reveals gold, not material gold, but inner gold, that which belongs to you by essence, but only reveals itself when you stop running from the fire and decide to walk through it with awareness. Because it is not the fire that destroys, it is the resistance to it that causes pain. The fire, when embraced, transforms, purifies, illuminates. And there is a symbolic practice that can support this vibrational transition. Write a letter to yourself, not from where you are now, but from a future point where this crisis has already been transcended, understood, transformed. Imagine that this future version of you is looking back with compassion. What would they say to you? What choices do they honor? What lessons do they cherish? What part of you bloomed because of this pain? This letter is not fantasy. It is a vibrational gesture, an alignment with the version of you who already lives in the frequency of healing. And when you write from that consciousness, something starts to shift. You step out of the frequency of the victim and into the frequency of the creator. You stop asking for answers and begin accessing wisdom, and the crisis which once felt like an enemy becomes an ally, a mirror, a bridge, because in the end, it's not about avoiding the pains of life. It's about allowing them to reveal who you came here to be. Purpose is not something you find. It is something that reveals itself. Once all that is not essential begins to fall away, and sometimes your outer world needs to collapse so your inner mission can emerge clearly. And it always begins from the same place, the silence that remains after everything else is gone. The empty space where the voice is born that gently says, "Now it's your time to shine." We don't always see the purpose in the midst of pain, but there are texts that remind us that an invisible path exists even when your feet no longer know where to step. Psalm 46 is one of those texts, not only because of its spiritual beauty, but because of its vibrational precision. It doesn't merely describe a belief, it activates a frequency. Each word, each verse, each pause carries an energetic architecture that reorganizes the inner world of anyone who chooses to feel, not just recite. That's why it's not just a scripture, it's a map. A map for those who are lost, a shelter for those who no longer know where to rest, a fortress for those who feel deep inside that they're on the edge of collapse. Napoleon Hill teaches us that crisis is a turning point, not an end, but a fork in the road. It's the moment where burning desire must meet applied faith, where the dream, often dormant, must reconnect with the fire of persistence. And that reconnection only happens when we stop resisting chaos and start having a conversation with it, when we stop cursing what collapsed and begin listening to what's trying to be born. Because every spiritual birth demands a kind of symbolic death, the death of illusion, of control, of the old self. Florence Scovel Shinn used to say that the word is your magic wand, but not just any word, the living word, the one that is felt, the one that carries intention, presence, vibration. And the psalm, when used with that kind of awareness, becomes exactly that, an instrument of transmutation, a key that doesn't force the lock, but resonates at its frequency until it opens. It is in that resonance that transformation happens, not through repetition, but through the vibration that activates when you read, not with your eyes, but with your heart. Maybe your pain today is asking for a new kind of listening, a new posture, not the posture of someone waiting for a miracle to come from outside, but someone who begins to vibrate the miracle from within, because crisis, though painful, is also a mirror and a bridge, a mirror of what needs to die, a bridge toward what is ready to be born. And as you cross that bridge, even with fear, even not knowing what lies on the other side, something in you strengthens, something in you aligns, something in you awakens. And what if, after all, the chaos was simply the way the divine found to remind you of the power that had been asleep? What if the collapse was the final call for you to stop running from yourself and finally come home? Because it is there, exactly there in the center of your presence, that everything begins to reorganize, not as it was, not as before, but as it needs to be, and perhaps as it always truly was.